Kia ora koutou, ko Madeleine Armstrong Wilcox Tuku Ingoa. I'm the head of programs here at the Neurodiversity in Education project, and I'm really pleased you've been able to find some time to catch up on our parent education session for Term 4, all about transitions in schooling. So in this session, we're going to talk through what do we mean by that, and what are transitions in schooling. Why can these be a challenge for some of our gifted and otherwise neurodivergent kiddos? What are some of the common experiences from parents? And as this is a recording, not the actual live session, I'll just talk through some of the things that we've been hearing from families. We'll share some of our recommendations for MindPlus for ways that we can support kids through those transitions. And then I'll touch in on what we're actually doing in our MindPlus classes, because we are aware, obviously, that it's Term 4. Kids are all going to have a transition in their schooling between this year and the start of next year, whether it's a new class, a new teacher, a new school, whatever. We know that's in play at the moment, so we're responding to that in our classes right now. So that's what we're going to be talking through. First of all, what do we mean by transitions in schooling? And it's very simple. Any change. It's not rocket science at all. For most kids, the most common changes they're going to have in their schooling is moving to a new teacher, a new class of kids. It might be moving between types of classes, say moving from a single cell classroom where it's one teacher and 30 kids to a modern learning environment where it's a lot of teachers and a lot more kids, or moving between phases of schooling. So sometimes, as children move into the senior part of the school, things change for them. Moving between schools, so from primary to intermediate, or from intermediate into secondary, or just changing schools altogether, as we know that kids do. So there are all sorts of changes like that happen at schooling. From us as parents, we kind of think, well, that's just normal and those are the things that happen. Yes, indeed, but for many of our gifted and otherwise neurodivergent kids, these things can be quite tricky for them. And let's just have a little look at why that is. Your kids aren't being difficult. Let's look. So first and foremost, some of their likely inherent characteristics of their giftedness can make those transitions more difficult. So first of all, if we think about intensity, we know that our gifted kids have intense brains that work at a mile a minute. They take in everything, they process everything in all sorts of ways. They have brains that want to think. And when you have a brain that really wants to think, it's probably going to think through all of the possibilities of all of the things that could happen in this transition. And because all brains are naturally hardwired to anticipate the bad things that are going to happen, our big thinkers are going to anticipate a lot of possible bad things that could happen in this change. So because those brains go a mile a minute, there's probably a lot of thinking going on about that change. We know that our gifted kids also have big emotions. Their emotions and their thinking are hand in hand. They are tightly bound together. So when those emotions are really strong and that thinking is really strong, it's a recipe for either huge excitement and anticipation and wahey, this is going to be the best thing ever, or this is going to be the worst and most terrible experience of my life and I'm absolutely terrified about it, and anywhere on that sort of scale in between. So big brains, big emotions come together to create a lot of anticipatory stress. We know that our gifted kids often have a tendency to like fairness and rightness and all things being exactly the way they should be. And sometimes transitions in school don't feel fair. For instance, if they have a peer group of friends and then next year some friends are here and some friends are there and some friends are going elsewhere, kids may think, well, that's really unfair that our friendship group has been broken up in this way by the school. So that is another thing to think about. That inherent need for fairness may be exacerbating that stress. For some of our gifted kids, they're really big picture thinkers. They think about the systems and the kind of big ideas in our world, which is fantastic. Thinking about transitions in schooling, they might be thinking about, well, what is the purpose of going to school? Why do I have to go? Why is intermediate school 2 years long? This doesn't make any sense in my head. So they observe education as an entire system and perhaps start to find some of the flaws in it from their perspective. Again, building that anticipatory stress. We know that any brain does not like change. Our brains like sameness and routine and predictability. It's what helps humans get through a day. And that's exactly the same for our kids. Their brains are not enjoying periods of change either. We know that some of these feelings, whether it's great excitement or anxiety, are going to be building up over time, so that by the time we reach the start of a new school year, there's been a lot going on already. And we know that there are lots of small changes that feed into a transition in schooling or are caused by a transition in schooling, as well as big things going on. And if we can manage some of those small things with and for our kids, it frees up a little space for them to try to work through the big things. We're going to talk more about this as we go, but for instance, what I mean by that is a small change might be you need different stationery. You have different requirements in intermediate school than you did in primary school. That's a small thing. For us as adults, okay, whatever, that's all good. But for your child, that could be causing a decent amount of stress. And how will I manage having 7 different books with 7 different subjects? It's going to be hard work. If we can smooth over that little thing, because really it is a little thing, and help our kids understand it and manage it easily, it frees up space for them to think through and try and manage the bigger things. And for many kids, the bigger things are friendships, how they're going to make new friends, or grieving what they might see as the loss of old friends, and will my teacher be okay style of stress. What is the learning going to be like? So we smooth over the little things so that our kids can focus on the big things and really put attention into managing those bigger things instead of worrying about their stationery. Okay. In this part of the session, we just talked about what our kids are experiencing or what we have been noticing, and being term 4, there is often already a build-up of stress, of anxiety that's coming out in those nighttime, bedtime conversations about feeling stressed or worried about what next year is going to bring. Some of our parents share that their kids are really excited and they are gearing up for a brilliant experience. And parents are slightly worried that the experience may not live up to the very high expectations that our kids are holding. Completely normal and natural. We have kids that are worried about a change in tone or expectation in their schooling. So moving up into the senior part of the school means there might be more responsibilities and more homework and more pressure. You can see that kind of sense of impending doom descend on our kids in that way. So those are just a few little things that parents have been telling us that they have been experiencing. So if you're watching this later on, just take a minute and take that big picture view. What is going on? What is my child experiencing now? And what might I predict they will be experiencing between now and when they do start at school next year? Okay, so at MindPlus, we have gathered together a whole lot of recommendations from a whole lot of our teachers over time, and we have some ideas for you to share. So first, get started now. Just as you get started with where is my child going to go to school next year, or all of those discussions, start thinking now about setting your child up for a successful and smooth transition into whatever else is happening for them next year. Get in early, get working now with your child and for your child. We don't recommend taking a wait and see approach. Like, oh, we'll just see how it plays out and then kind of deal with it at the other end. Don't do that. We know that it's quite, when our gifted kids have a hard time, it's harder to dig them out or support them out of that hard time than it is than if we had kind of tried to prevent that hard time in the first place. So a wait and see approach is not, in our experience, going to be that useful for them. It's a good idea between now and, say, March next year to try and limit any other big changes going on in life. Now, I know that might sound really tricky to manage as a family because, life happens. But if you're planning on moving house or adopting a puppy or completely revolutionizing your household schedule or, any other really big thing going on, just think about dialing that down a little and just trying to keep everything really calm and steady now through the summer break and early next year. Ultimately that's a short time in the life of a family, but just try and keep everything on a very smooth and even keel. Don't introduce any radical big changes into your family if you can possibly help it. All right, give everyone the power that they need, and that includes your child. So sometimes our gifted kids, especially our young ones, feel quite helpless in the face of things going on around them. And they're not helpless at all. They might feel helpless or at the mercy of their emotions. Again, they don't have to feel that way. There are strategies we can teach them to feel more in control of what's going on in their brains and what's going on in their emotions. So let's do that, right? Let's really give them back a little bit of power, or make sure they feel that they have a little bit of power in this situation. Empower yourselves. Excuse me. So just by thinking this through and getting prepared and planning for this transition, you are empowering yourself to, make it happen as well as possible rather than just leaving it up to the winds of fate. Also, empower teachers and schools. Give them the support they need to do the best for your child. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, and a good way that you can do that. But key piece of advice, and this is going to be repeated a couple of times, so let's hope it sticks. Try and sort out the small things, smooth them over, prepare them, get them out of the way, make them easy so that your child, you and your child together, but importantly them, they have the mental space and capacity to try and manage the big things. Right? So if you have a child that does lots of after school meltdowns, think to yourself, would you rather have an after school meltdown about stationery, or would you rather have an after school meltdown about I'm having friendship issues? Right? The stationery stuff is so easy to solve. Friendship issues are obviously more complex, but you kind of need to pick your battles. Where would you like your child spending their time and energy? Friendship, not stationary. So let's work on sorting the small things so that we give a bit of space to pay attention to the big things. There we are again. Right, what do we mean by the small things? Here are some examples. Sort out uniform. If it's a change in uniform, it's a new uniform. Even if you're buying new uniform pieces, great advice is to buy secondhand so it's already nice and soft. If you're buying new or secondhand either, wash it a number of times in your usual laundry detergent so that it smells like everything else in your family already smells. If you have a child who has any sensitivity to their sensory input, a brand new school uniform that's still all stiff and got unusual creases in it and smells weird is going to be a problem for them. Their sensory system is going to be bombarded by this uncomfortable information. Doesn't leave them time and energy to focus on the big things like, how do I make new friends? So deal with that uniform, deal with it early. If your child is opposed to tags, get rid of the tags. Just do everything to make that uniform no big deal. If in your uniform there are woolen items, woolen socks, woolen shorts or skirts or pants, or a woolen jumper, get that as well washed and comfortable. Get all the prickliness out of it so that they are soft and smooth and lovely, not new wool prickliness. So those are really little things that are really easy to take care of. Next little thing, if your child uses sensory supports or attention supports or any of those things routinely at their school now, continue the use of those supports into next year. So if they use fidgets at school or earplugs or headphones or, wobble cushions or anything like that, make sure those things transition with your child into their new classroom or their new teacher or their new school or whatever. If your child is feeling, and this is quite common, we hear, a little bit potentially sensitive or potentially embarrassed about those supports, work on them. You can do a few things. You can try and make those supports more discreet. So if your child is a mover and groover and can't get through a school lesson without, really being very active, teach them about micro fidgets. So really small things that you can have in your hand really discreetly that you can fidget with and you're still moving. Even hands under a table so that it's not so obvious. Teach them about toe fidgets. This was a great wee piece of advice I heard from a choir teacher of all people, because in choirs and also in orchestras, you need to be, because you're on show, you're sitting still. And if you're musically inclined, you want to move your body. You don't want to be still. So you teach your toes to wiggle and fidget and jiggle about to their heart's content in your shoes. And that means you get some of that sensory input from the movement without anyone ever seeing what's going on. So maybe teach some of those strategies in advance. Have your kids practice them. So kind of try to minimize the public view of those supports if you can, if that's possible, but also teach kids that every brain is different and every brain deserves to get what it needs to be able to function well. Give them some statements. One of my own children is hard of hearing. He has hearing aids. We equipped him with a simple sentence to say to people if they asked, "What's that thing in your ear?" All he needed to say was, "Well, that's so I can hear you." Just teach them a simple stop response. to give and teach them to, have that as an emotional barrier. That is someone else's question, fine, but I don't need to take that question as a personal attack. It's just a question asking for information. I'm giving the information and I'm going to move on without feeling attacked or threatened. It's no big deal. So teach them to how to respond to other people in a way that's as neutral as possible without it being a big emotional response. So uniforms, supports, tackle those things. Another thing that can be in kids' minds is how am I getting to school and how am I getting home at the end of the day? So bed in those routines as early as you can. If they're getting a bus or walking or public transport and that's new, practice that over and over and over so that it's no big deal. If they need to get a bus card, get them, hot tip from parents, get multiple bus cards because they're probably going to lose one or two or maybe several. Set up a good routine for where a bus card goes. Probably not in pockets because they do fall out. Like clip it into a school bag, give it a really good solid routine. Teach your kids how to use I'm using buses as an example, but actually, you can apply this anywhere. Teach them how to use the app, the timetable app, or read a timetable on, bus stand or whatever it is. Make sure they know a plan B. If you miss the bus, it's no big deal. This is your plan B. This is what you do if that happens. Don't make it a huge drama because if kids are using public transport for the first time, they are going to muck it up. It's pretty much guaranteed, and that's okay. So practice all of that in advance. Get it bedded in so it's no big deal. If your child has late anxiety, so they cannot bear being late to school, make sure you engineer your mornings so that you have additional time allowed to counteract that late anxiety. So if they need to be in class at 9, maybe your child wants to arrive at 8:30, reverse engineer back from there so you have plenty of time to get there. So getting to and from school, one thing, practice all those routines. Practice also getting through with school. So if your child is starting at a new school, visit the school at the weekend over the holidays when the school is actually open. Apart from your orientation visit or interview or whatever, visit it again at several different times and practice. Where do you enter the school? Where's the school office to go to if you really need help? Say hi to the office ladies. They are gold. Where's your classroom? Where's the art block if it's a high school? Where's the science block? Where are the good toilets? Where's the sick bay? Where's the good playground? Where will be a good place to have lunch? Practice getting familiar with the school. If you can't do visits, at least jump on their website, try and find a school map or whatever. Do as much as you can so that when your child arrives there on the first day, they're not kind of terrified by what the school looks like, how it's laid out. They don't get lost easily. So it's all kind of in place and they know what's going on. It'll give your kids such an amazing sense of power to go, oh, I know exactly where I'm going. Oh, I know exactly a really good place to have lunch. It will also build their social status really early. If a child is kind of, I get this, I get what's going on. Other kids will be like, hey, I'm with you because you know where you're going. And it's a great social in. So practice all of those things, get them bedded in, get them, easy and smooth way before you start. Other things to practice: using and following a timetable, reading a timetable. If your child has a paper timetable, make sure they have multiple copies of it in their school bag, on the fridge, in their bedroom, folded up in their lunchbox, shoved in their jacket pockets all over the place. If they have a timetable on an app on their phone, make sure they know where that app is and how to read it, how to get to their timetable, but also how to ask teachers or someone in the school about, what period is this? What day is this? And I know those sound like strange questions if your child is just at primary school, but some high schools work on this. It's day 8, and in day 8, we have periods 3 to 7 only. What? It is very easy to get confused. So practice those things in advance. If your child is going to need to make a lot of new friends quickly, or at least be socially comfortable, and they don't have easy social routines they can follow, teach them some of those and practice them out in your family as much as possible. It could be as simple as, hey, I'm Johnny, what's your name? Or, hey, I'm Johnny, I like your jacket. Or whatever it is, the social moves, you can teach those in advance and practice them to make sure your child is comfortable just being around other people and introducing themselves as a basic. Get them to practice, if this is a thing that's needed, asking for something, asking to have a toilet break, asking for directions, asking for help from a teacher. Give them simple routines to practice in that as well. If your child is moving from a small school to a larger school, do some crowd exposure, especially here in Auckland. Some of our high schools are enormous. There is a huge volume of humans in those schools. Practice in a crowded setting how your child walks through a crowd, doesn't, teach them how not to feel pressured and anxious in a crowd. That's quite a hard piece of learning for some of our kids. They're deeply sensitive to that volume of humans, but practice it in advance so they know it's going to be crowded in the school, but you know what? I'm okay. I know how to walk through a crowd. I know that I'm just chill and it's all going to be fine. Teach them those things in advance. To and from school, we've already talked about. Okay, so a few P's for you to think through. Plan things out now. Predict what are going to be the sticking points, the hiccups that are particular for your child. We've talked through lots of different little things, but if you're like, actually, uniform's not going to be a big deal for my kid, fine. But I know the social moves might be an issue. So focus on the things that you think are going to be potential difficulties for your child. Predict them. Ask your kid to predict them as well. What is it that could be a problem here? How do we make that easier for you? Practice everything in advance so that it's the newness, the weirdness has gone out of it all. Be patient with yourself, with your family, with your child, with the school as they settle in. Typo here, apologies. Have in your head, and if this works for your child, think through, do you have a plan B? If after a term at a new school, it's really not working and you're struggling and your child is struggling, what's your plan B? Do you have a next plan and a next plan? Because we know plans are made to be broken and changed, and that's fine. But think through what might be your plan B if you need it. A very quick note on MindPlus attendance for people that are changing schools between 24 and 25 is we sometimes have parents say, look, we're just going to settle into our new school and then see how we go, when we might well come back to MindPlus after a wee while. We do not recommend you take that approach for 2 key reasons. One, MindPlus attendance is going to be your child's point of consistency. It's going to be the one thing that doesn't really change. MindPlus is always going to be the same. It sounds like it's very dull, but it's not. We're always going to have warm-up activities. We're going to have our conceptual development lesson. Then we're going to have some talent development. We're going to have some personal development. It's going to flow as usual, as expected. It is the point of consistency when other stuff relating to schooling is changing. As much as we can, and as much as it's working out for everyone, we try and keep kids in a MindPlus class with a familiar cohort, with their same peers, as much as we can. We can't ever guarantee that, but that is actually our goal, to keep a consistent peer group. So there's another piece of consistency there. They'll have a similar peer group at MindPlus, and they are more than likely to have the same MindPlus teacher, because we also try and keep teachers with kids in that looping style. So that's one reason. Number two reason is many of our classes are full to the brim. And if you say, oh, actually, we'll wait and see, and maybe we'll come back later, you might be plonked back on a wait list, unfortunately, because we do cap our classes at low numbers. So we can't guarantee that we'll have a place for your child when you need it later. It is really preferable for that consistency and to make sure you actually get a spot at MindPlus, just to keep that going right through. Okay. So what are we actually doing with kids at MindPlus in Term 4, knowing that many of them are being transitioning into a different school context, school itself or class? So one of the big things that we are focusing on this term is this idea that you have some power. We've been working on power all year in conceptual development across the year. And this term, we're specifically looking at this idea of the power to act. We're looking at examples of people who have taken action, not just big picture action like climate strike or protests or anything like that, but small action that everybody can take that makes a positive difference. So focusing on this idea that you have the power to take action. In personal development, we're backing it up with this idea that actually you can develop some habits, positive habits, not bad ones, or personal traits that allow you and support you and enable you to use your power. Right. So not only do you have the power, and here are some examples of other people who've got the power, used their power to act, and doing lots of learning about that, but you can also specifically develop qualities that help you use that power. Persistence, resilience, curiosity, those are some of the things that come to mind. We're backing those up with continuing some work we started last term in many of our classes around executive functioning, because we know that this can be an area of lagging skills for our gifted and otherwise neurodivergent kids. Executive functioning is a huge array of all sorts of different things. So to make it manageable for kids, we've dialed it down just to 3 things that we know are going to have a big impact. Attention, energy. What we mean by energy is getting things started, making sure we stick to things that we start, and being able to finish things well, and why finishing things well matters. So attention, energy, and then the third part is memory, how that works, why it works, what we can do. The important part of what we're doing in executive functioning is teaching kids some deliberate ideas about what these things are, and teaching them some deliberate strategies to try and boost these things in them. Like, how do you try to manage your attention? You may not ever get it 100%, especially for a brain that has ADHD. It's always going to be a challenge, but there are things we can try that are going to make a difference. So these are the things that are happening in most of our MindPlus classes this term, that really support that idea of making sure kids know they have some power in this situation. All right. And in our online session that we had live, we just talked through what people have already been doing that's been working, what we know worked the last time kids had a school transition. So when they started school, what worked at that point, and what kind of things from what we've talked about tonight, what might work really well. One of the key things that came up from parents was this idea that practicing little things in advance will be really useful. We had some Q&A time. If you do have any questions at any time, do just drop us an email. More than happy to chat. Thank you so much for spending some time talking about transitions in schooling, and we hope it goes really smoothly for you and your family. Bye-bye.